Since I opened the channel, I've got tons of people trying to promote dry fasting and trying to promote a specific dry fasting guru. Or they ask me about dry fasting or say I should do dry fasting instead of water fasting and on and on. Most of them are first-time commenters who may just be alts, or they're just someone that doesn't watch the channel at all. At any rate, since I read and respond to all the comments, I've grown tired of this and I've decided to address why I don't promote dry fasting and why I don't think it's really that good of an idea, even if it doesn't make me popular.
Well, I'm not here to win any popularity contests.
Oh, you haven't? You haven't? Oh, no, far from it. Far from, yes. As a matter of fact, I believe, yes, you are dead last on my popularity list.
People can do whatever they want for all of me, but what I won't allow is people making false or misleading claims. You want to be a highly deficient vegan, that's fine by me, but don't promote lies to convince people or you'll be immediately banned, at least from my channel. Unfortunately, this is very, very common. This also happens with the topic of fasting, and as with the vegans, I get a lot of alts spamming the channel talking about nothing but dry fasting. I didn't want to make this video, but the problem is there are so many people who take these misleading claims as truth that a lot of people talking to me really just don't know why I would never do this, or at least why I don't really do it much. The misleading claims are that dry fasting does XYZ, which is actually something that has only been tested in water fasting, or which also happens in water fasting. Stem cell release, that's only tested in water fasting. Telomere lengthening of the stem cell pool, that's also only tested in water fasting. Ketones being deuterium free, guess what? All ketones are always deuterium free, and it's a lot easier to water fast to get them than to dry fast. And it's even easier to get them with a keto diet, and that's the reason that diet exists. So if that's what you're really after, just go on the keto diet or just buy some and take them. I have looked into it as best as I could, but there's little or nothing to support dry fasting. There's a list made up by one of the main guys promoting it with a few dry fasting specific topics. But keep in mind, these are the only areas of dry fasting studied at all. Every other claim rides on the back of water fasting, but it's presented as if it were only related to dry fasting in all of these videos. Not only is that untrue, but there's no proof that any of this actually works in dry fasting until it's actually tested directly and measured scientifically. At least 90% of the time when a theory is tested, it's proven wrong. Keep in mind, one of the biggest proponents is a guy with a theory that the world is going to end in 20 years or something like that, or at least that it's going to have this major catastrophe. That shows the mentality of this kind of over-speculative and very untested science. There's a million doomsday theories, and like the Seventh-day Adventist cult, that stood out in the cold waiting for the apocalypse over and over again because they were sure the rapture was coming on a certain day. So far, every one of these theories, every one of these certain days have all passed by with absolutely nothing of note happening.
I am as blank as a fart.
Every supplement I recommend has been heavily tested for safety, and most of them you could take very large amounts without any worries at all. Though you could have issues with niacin and vitamin D if you went too high, but then that's actually true of all vitamins. In fact, every single supplement requires some fairly thorough safety testing to even be sold at all. People ask me why I don't sell certain compounds, and the answer is even though it would be perfectly safe, you can't. It's illegal and they'd throw me in jail. Even so, I constantly get people trying to claim that they're unsafe, such as the wacky claims about glycine lately. Fasting has also been exhaustively tested for safety. Many people were tested by Cahill's fasting clinic, He was an Irish physician who moved to Florida and promoted very long fasts of 30 or even 60 days. Thousands of people did these fasts, and most of them had no problems at all. Even so, a few did die, and due to a specific cause that has specific relevance to dry fasting, which I'm going to reveal later. This is not true of dry fasting at all. Aside from Ramadan fasting, which has been done for centuries, which is a 12-hour dry fast during the daylight hours, followed by eating and drinking at sundown, there's never been any real safety testing in humans at all. In fact, there's been almost no human study of dry fasting longer than 12 hours either. And there's not likely to be, since there are many health concerns, and it's unlikely to make it through an ethics review board.
The Board of Regents has decided to terminate your grant. You are to vacate these premises immediately.
Your theories are the worst kind of popular tripe, your methods are sloppy, and your conclusions are highly questionable. You are a poor scientist, Dr. Vane.
I mentioned earlier that a few people on very long water fasts died. The issue they had was intestinal blockage. They started the fast constipated, and the feces in their body dried out and hardened over time, and this led to a blockage, which is actually very dangerous. I know that because I had one myself due to a hernia long before I started fasting, and it was a complete nightmare. Thankfully, the hernia eventually went away after I started fasting. Thankfully, it is easy to avoid this issue by taking small amounts of salt water on these very long fasts. Vinegar also seems to help me a great deal. It's also not a concern for the fasts that I promote, which are mainly only 36 to 96 hour fasts. You can do longer fasts, but that is when you start to have to worry about things like metabolic slowdown, refeeding syndrome, intestinal blockage, and so on. I feel it's much better to just do the shorter fasts more often, rather than doing the extremely long fasts, and you can just eat a meal and turn right back around into a new fast. Now, if I had cancer or a very serious injury, then I might consider them. But for general health purposes, and I'm able to walk and have all my limbs and everything, and especially just for weight loss, they're really just not needed. Now, what about intestinal blockage in dry fasting? Is that something you need to worry about? As I said before, this is completely untested, so who knows? If it's a rare issue, like water fasting that only crops up after dry fasting for a very long time, then that's one thing. But the only way to know is to try it out under controlled conditions and see what happens. Science is 100% based on testing. The hypothesis stage is easy for anyone to do, but when we actually test the hypothesis, we find out it's wrong at least 90% of the time, even if you're a super smart guy like Linus Pauling. I've seen people pass away from this problem, and it's not pretty, so don't take this danger lightly at all.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm shaking my booty.
All fat that you burn in the body produces metabolic water, and in spite of what exercise science says, the main fuel of the body is fatty acids. This provides about 85% of the body's energy during normal times, and about 5% is fermentation of carbs, and the rest is oxidative phosphorylation of carbs. When in ketosis, which we're born in by the way, the brain also burns mainly fat, and this percentage goes even higher. So at that point, you're not going to be burning much carbs at all except for in hypoxic niches, such as where your stem cells are. The only time this goes lower is during intensive exercise or when there is massive mitochondrial damage, such as in post-viral syndrome, and you just don't have the mitochondria to burn that fat anymore. And of course, during cancer. Since you constantly burn fat, you also constantly produce metabolic water. This sounds really nifty, and dry fasting advocates go on about it endlessly, but is that enough? That is, do you make enough metabolic water to keep from being dehydrated? While most of the claims about dry fasting have never been tested, this one actually has. Unfortunately, the answer is a strong and resounding no. No, you don't make enough metabolic water to keep from being dehydrated, which you could probably realize simply from the fact that you're making it all the time anyway, but you still have to drink water. But we really know this is true because hunger strikes are very common in prisons, and sometimes there's also water strikes in prisons from time to time. No one ever dies in these hunger strikes, or at least it's very rare. The few who do only pass away after very, very long periods. Water fasting for very long periods is very safe, so long as the person is not malnourished when they start. And many of you have no doubt heard of Angus Barbieri, who water fasted for over a year straight. Though it should be noted, he also supplemented vitamins, especially vitamin B, though interestingly, he did not supplement vitamin C, but was perfectly fine. If this claim were true, and your body can make all the metabolic water it needs, you should be able to dry fast for months at a time, just like you can water fast for that period. In reality, most people expire from dry fasting in just 10 to 11 days, and the all-time longest survivor was 17 days. He was a prisoner in an Italian prison in the early 20th century. Since these people passed on due to dehydration, that also means they were doing damage before that point. Possibly permanent organ damage, and almost certainly doing a lot of damage to their skin long before that point. In fact, it could happen immediately when you start doing it, for all we know. When does this kick in, though? Again, nobody knows. Since people expired after only 10 days, I would guess they were doing damage long before then, possibly even after just a couple of days. No one really knows how safe it is to dry fast or for how long. And in fact, 6:30 a.m. is the most common time for a heart attack, which is when people are at their most dehydrated point due to dry fasting in their sleep. Like exercise, all fasting is a stress on the body, but dry fasting is a much bigger stress, like sprinting compared to a light jog. That's pretty alarming when you realize that dry fast lengths of 7 days are very commonly promoted. Anyone promoting that is really asking you to take an awful lot on faith.
You sure you know what you're doing?
Hey.
You said you knew what you were doing!
No, I just said hey. If you'd let me finish the whole sentence, it would have been hey. No, I don't.
With water fasting, you can eventually do literally everything you can do while eating normally. There's a guy in Israel who does long bike races while fasted. There's a few marathon runners in America who have run marathons fasted. And I'll go on bike rides and hikes while fasted all the time, and really it's not a big deal once you're used to it. I do all the normal things that I do while I'm fasting, and then I work out with weights right before I break the fast, and this works really well for me. This does take some getting used to, but there's no danger at all. I tried a bike ride while dry fasting for a few days, and I literally thought I was going to die. It took days for me to fully recover. With dry fasting, you can't really do much of anything except sit around all day, and that's exactly what most of the people who promote it recommend that you do. If you work on a computer, you can probably do that just fine, but if you have an active job or even talk on the phone a lot, you can probably just forget it.
I can't keep up this pace forever.
Even so, that is not what stops me from doing any dry fasting. Though I would definitely never do a 7-day dry fast, which is completely insane. The issue is the effects on stem cells and telomeres, which are unknown. Now, the guys who promote this stuff go on and on about stem cells and telomeres. The truth is, this is only proven to work in water fasting, and everything else is pure speculation. While they seem to believe dry fasting is a magic process that works several times better than water fasting, and will burn 3 times as much fat, there's just no proof at all that this is true. In water fasting, not only do you release stem cells, but you also replenish the stem cell pool to replace the ones that you use, which doesn't always happen when they deploy. You also increase the telomere length of the stem cell pool at the same time. So this is very encouraging and is probably the best mechanism of human life extension that we have confirmed to work to date. Even so, it's not proven to actually extend life, but it's extremely promising. Unfortunately, we don't know what happens with dry fast. I do believe stem cells will be released, but you have to realize this is not always a good thing. It's possible for them to release without regenerating. It's also possible that the telomere lengths reduce as well. Dehydration is an extreme stress and it could do more harm than good. Sauna is very popular and is shown to have a lot of benefits, but at the same time it's shown to reduce telomere length. This is a cause for concern not only for sauna, but perhaps even a bigger one for dry fasting, because it shares many of the same mechanisms as sauna, but is much harder on you than the sauna is. Your body reacts to stress by stimulating its repair mechanisms, but if there's too much stress, it simply can't repair the damage, and that's why I don't recommend resveratrol and a few other supplements that other people do. And that's why sprinting and walking are great for your health, but marathons are simply awful for your health. I know a guy who passed away due to a heart attack while running a 10K race. And when you talk to runners and serious cyclists of my age, they all seem to have one thing in common, and that's heart attacks. Not to mention bad knees, which is the reason that I stopped jogging. Now, it's possible that dry fasting has the same results as water fasting in the same period when it comes to stem cells, or it could be that it works even faster and it has more results. But it could also be that it works faster but then causes damage after a certain point. And it's even possible that it doesn't do anything at all, though I doubt this last case is going to be what happens. Well, science isn't about intuition and logic, it's about testing the truth. And the truth is, we just don't know, no matter how smart we think we are.
So you smart, huh?
No.
I thought your head would be bigger.
Now, obviously, the people who promote dry fasting believe it's better, or they just wouldn't be doing it. One area it's shown to be better is getting into ketosis faster in animal studies, which should also be true for humans. The thing is, I don't really care about ketones much. It's largely irrelevant to your ability to fast, and it is completely separate from autophagy and stem cell release and all of the other benefits of fasting, so really, who cares? It also doesn't show that you actually reach deeper ketosis levels, just that you reach it more quickly. So while ketones have some health benefits, since you don't get to a higher value necessarily, and since you can just eat a keto diet to get them, it's not really that huge of an advantage, if it's even an advantage at all. You also get much more growth hormone release during the dry fasting, a lot more actually. This is the most promising benefit of dry fasting, and it has actual proof behind it. The only one of note really, but it is a good one. The studies people often quote about fasting raising growth hormone 1800% or 2000% or whatever it is, those are actually from one of the few dry fasting studies that are performed in humans, which is a Ramadan fasting study, which seems to be the only type we really see. This is a big advantage, but it also leads me to be cautious. Stress at a cellular level releases growth hormone, and this is a gigantic stress even compared to water fasting, which is no surprise since most people perish from dry fasting after around 10 days, while you can water fast for months on end. So there's definitely something to these shorter dry fasts, but how far can you safely take it? And when does this process max out? Is it 18 hours? Is it 24 hours? Is it 36 hours? Is it 48 hours? Is it 72 hours? Nobody knows for sure. But I would say that 7 days is extremely optimistic, to say the least. A unique aspect of dry fasting is that the lack of water is also hard on the bacteria in your gut. This sounds great, but keep in mind your negative gut bacteria and your candida will die off quickly when you deprive them of carbohydrate. Water fasting already has this effect, and it will also leave your positive gut bacteria largely intact because they can live off the dead bacteria and yeast. Occasionally, people try to scare others away from fasting by talking about a Herxheim reaction from bacterial die-off in water fasting. This is not a big deal because you will still be going to the bathroom while water fasting, and this just gets them so they're flushing down the toilet anyway. But this doesn't happen in dry fasting, and these poisons, aka lipopolysaccharides, have nowhere to go. They're actually very damaging to your health and are one of the main drivers of immunosenescence and aging in the body. So while it seems promising to dry fast for benefits to the microbiome, it probably has no benefits over water fasting, and it will probably actually have worse results because you're just going to kill everything off. And that's it. Everything else they claim dry fasting does is actually something water fasting does. In fact, there's usually no proof that it happens in dry fasting at all. So don't fall for the idea it has these endless special benefits. Almost everything they attribute to it is actually only proven in water fasting alone, and this includes burning fat much more quickly. But that doesn't seem to keep them from saying it over and over again.
Sir, phrenology was dismissed as quackery 160 years ago.
Of course you'd say that. You're the brain pan of a stagecoach tilter.
Now, dry fasting may have some place for some people, especially with shorter fasts, but considering a 10 to 11 day fast is usually lethal, I would definitely stay away from long dry fasts. Dry fasting is dehydrating over time, as proven by its lethality. You also make metabolic water when water fasting, and in fact, all fat burnings, you're making it constantly. But it's not enough to replenish your body completely, and if it were, you wouldn't have to drink in the first place. And you'd be able to dry fast basically indefinitely. I would also worry that dry fasting is going to have bad effects on the skin and organs, especially on the longer fasts, and it may be hard on the skin just dry fasting at all. It just may be something you don't really want to be doing, period. I also worry that dry fasting for long periods could damage your telomeres like sauna does. If this is true for stem cells, then any anti-aging benefits would be completely undone by this, and probably it's going to drive your aging. No fasting is proven to really extend life in humans, not yet anyway, but water fasting is proven to release stem cells, regenerate the stem cell pool when it does release them, and increase the average telomere length of the pool. This is very encouraging for human life extension, but this has only been proven in water fasting. We don't know that all of these happen in dry fasting, and due to the extreme stress of dry fasting, it's very possible that this leads to damage of your stem cell pools. And keep in mind, your stem cells are already in a very hypoxic, stressful condition throughout their whole lives. So dry fasting them on top of that could be something very harmful. A case has been made that dry fasting is better for the microbiome than water fasting, but that's unproven, and there's many reasons to think this would not be the case. Dry fasting does lead to more growth hormone release than water fasting, and that's the only solid and proven benefit for dry fasting over water fasting. Literally everything else is just speculation. This could make shorter fasts worthwhile, but long fasts have not really been tested for safety, and dry fasting has been tested for very few of the benefits that are known to occur in water fasting for that matter. So we can't really say for sure that we get any of this stuff at all in dry fasting, except for the growth hormone release, really. Dry fasting advocates mislead people by claiming all of the benefits of water fasting as if they actually only occur in dry fasting, in spite of the fact that most of them are totally unproven in dry fasting. Many of these advocates promote 7-day or even greater dry fasts, in spite of the fact people usually perish around 9 to 10 days. Very little activity can be performed on a dry fast, while you can do all the same things you normally do on a water fast, though you may have to take some time getting used to doing it that way. It's claimed the body burns much more fat while dry fasting than water fasting, but this is totally unproven. People keep saying it, but there's no studies to back it up. Someone sent me a list to a bunch of links for dry fasting on some channel. I'd read it before, but that is sort of what led me to making this video. And I was going to go through each of the studies and just try and analyze and see what they said and talk about it. I already did go through them all, but I'm not going to bother going into all the details because most of it is nonsense. For example, it talks about clotho and dehydration as if dehydration is a good thing because it downregulates clotho. But downregulating clotho is very bad. There's another study about dehydration versus fasting with diabetic ketoacidosis, and the same mistake is made. The dehydration group is worse than fasting, which is a water fasting group, not dry fasting. Most of the studies are just totally irrelevant or else were done with water fasting, not with dry fasting. So a lot of it is just the same studies that I post, which are all water fasting studies. Whoever assembled it just grabbed anything that said fasting or dehydration and probably never even looked at the original studies, either on Sci-Hub or at the library where you can do it for free. There was one where dry fasting birds appeared to burn more fat than water fasting birds, quite a lot more fat actually, but there's some big problems with that. First, flying animals have very special metabolic needs that humans don't have because of the incredible stress of flying. That's why bats are such ideal incubators for viruses, and that's where all of the crazy people trying to do malicious things look for these viruses. The paper itself also links to two conflicting studies, and these contradict it. So while it's possible there's more fat burning during dry fasting than water fasting in humans, and I think that probably is true to some extent, we just don't have any proof of that in mammals at all, let alone humans, and we don't know how big of an effect this might be if it exists at all, but we do know you still get dehydrated while fasting with dry fasting. Otherwise, you would be able to do it indefinitely, which you obviously can't. You can only do it for maybe 10 days before you run into big problems. And you're likely doing damage to yourself long before that. In short, the benefits of dry fasting are all speculative. And the people who promote it do so in a manner that misleads people into thinking that it has endless special benefits, like metabolic water, in ketones that have no deuterium in them and so on, that already exists in all other forms of fasting and even in just the keto diet. In reality, almost all of these benefits are just the standard benefits of water fasting, or else they're totally unproven claims based on speculation. While they may seem very convincing to the people who have not spent a great deal of time on this subject, researching and looking into the actual papers, you should be very wary of these claims.
Bosh Flimshaw!
If only we had listened to that boy instead of walling him up in the abandoned coke oven.